The title of this talk is Why is Eugenics Fraudulent? Genius versus normal is not due to genes. This is episode number 6 of the BMTalk 3D. I'd like to review a little bit laws. Anti-discrimination laws, freedom of speech laws, academic freedom laws, and laws about defamation and about the protected activities when you report something that you think it's violating some laws to the authorities and your activities are protected. Steve Pinker recently has been saying that nature-nurture debate is over, and he was quoting Eric Turkheim. All human behavior traits are partially heritable. And I raised the question, what do we mean by heritable? And how much certainty of heredity? And is that license to racial discrimination? MSNBC had a program in 2016. It's a series of 7 days of genius, and the 6th one is about, can genius be genetically engineered? The reporter said, genetically enhanced intelligence, how we might do it? The order of the speech is not necessarily the original order. I like to put things into perspective. Dalton Conley mentioned there are multiple instances, not just one instance like math skills or IQs. There are other instances like emotional intelligence, like personalities, all those things. So it's not just a single thing as G. From the genetic point of view, Steve Shu was talking about genetic prediction of intelligence. Over here, he said that the phenotype could be their intelligence. He also mentioned using the techniques of machine learning as tools from the genetic data. They can predict using algorithms, build genomic predictions with a little bit of DNA from a perpetrator from a crime scene. It predicts something like the height is 6'1" plus or minus 2 inches. He had an IQ of 160 plus or minus 15. That's his prediction. It's not there yet, but he said that maybe in the future, like 10 years. Steve Pinker said in psychology there's no laws, but he called it tongue-in-cheek, 3 laws of behavior genetics. I'd like to review what he said in terms of 3 laws. I like to call it more like scenarios because it's like cases. First one is twin brothers in different environments. They have the same genes from the same parents, and they have non-zero genetic influence in terms of later life, like whether they smoke and whether they're likely divorce. The second one is the effect of genes are stronger than the effect of family. And he was talking about adopted siblings from different families into the same families. And although they have the same family environment, their success or behaviors are very different. So he claimed that genes are stronger than effect of family environment. And the third one, he said that there is high variance in the prediction that probably Professor Steve Shun should pay attention to. He said that twins in the same family not perfectly correlated. I will mention the correlatedness in later slides. So he said they have the same environment. Is it the same? And I will say that they don't have the same environment very soon. Steve Pinker said we don't know where the variation is from. Now look at the first scenario I'd like to comment on. Steve Pinker said that twin brothers in different environments have a non-zero genetic influence. And I like to raise question, what if one is in US and another in North Korea? And you can see that even the same twin brothers, one in United States, another in North Korea, they have very different environment. And is that true? They are highly correlated in the behavior. In this case, environment is stronger than the genes. That's my question. The second scenario, Steve Pinker said that effects of genes are stronger than the effects of family. And I like to raise a question, what if a Chinese girl adopted by a US family? And look at the difference between this girl in the United States, adopted early on at baby time, compared to her sister in her hometown in China. You can see the impact of the environment is huge. Although twin sisters, they have the identical genes. The third scenario, the high variance. So I was asking, even genes are correlated in terms of the success of behavior. What is missing? Why prediction has a high variance, like Steve Pinker said? And I would say that gene environment, these two factors are too simple. And let's see how to refine next. And before I do that, I'd like to mention the fourth law that Steve Pinker said. Heritable effects are the product of many genes, each with a very small effect on IQ. It's not like IQ genes. He said no IQ gene that gives 5 IQ points, maybe 100,000, maybe 10,000 of them. Each group give maybe 10% of IQ point, higher or lower by a certain number. And I think that's simple-minded, very, very simple-minded. And I will explain that next. We need more detailed developmental models. And then let's look at biology. And what do we mean by genes? And what do we mean by genome? And we have cells, and there's nucleus. Inside the nucleus, we have chromosomes. And chromosome has genetic materials as double helix. Those has been identified as genetic material contributing to heredity. And in this example of a single gene is a strain that has a basic physical and functional unit of heredity. Give example, CFTR is a gene. And look at how genes is involved. And this is from past to present. We can see that there are evolutions from the lower animals and branching out. Then we have a modern human. The issue is how gene changes. Of course, gene will evolve through many years of evolution. Currently, is that IQ is not equally heritable. And he said one of the important findings is that IQ is not equally heritable. And he said for poor family, and IQ really did not really pay much effect. You know, if you don't have schooling to do, and whether you are smart or not, really did not really show up. But for highly successful families or high in socioeconomic status, the genes flourish this effect. And I will get to that point. I don't agree with him. I don't think the genes, even for a rich or successful family, and will highly important of flourishing their effect, but rather it's the details that you can differentiate provided by the high-level education and highly competitive environment, and not because of genes, and has little to do with the genes. And I'd like to mention the last episode of BMTalk 3D. The title is Did Turing Award Go to Fraud? Why do I mention that? Because Stephen Xu was talking about machine learning tools. And one example of a machine learning tool to be recognized is the Turing Award 2018. In that talk, and I was discussing Jeffrey Hinton, Joshua Benjo, Ian Lacombe. They basically used a technique that's fraudulent. They use post-selections and further possibly label a test set. Labeling the test set, if it was really true, then this is a major fraud in the competition in the ImageNet. And they also probably use the post-selection in the deep learning review article in Nature. Later on, because Google and Alphabet also published considerably in Nature and Science, and also there are issues of AlphaGo, and I raised the question, Alphabet, the work that they produced, probably involved falsification. And for more detail, you probably can watch that YouTube video. And Li Feifei mismanaged ImageNet and misled public. She stated machines' progress has basically reached and sometimes surpassed human level. And in that episode, I questioned that claim. Now look at the genes, which is across generations. And what about a single generation and a single individual? What we know is called mental development, and also involve development learning takes place at the same time and lifelong from baby time to adult to elderly. And I have a book, Natural and Artificial Intelligence, already second edition, and it's not on the Amazon yet, but you can go to Brainmind Institute to get this book for the second edition. Amazon will have this book very soon. I need to just get the time to get onto the Amazon. And I proposed 5 factors of mental development. You develop not just physically, but also mentally, and also your cognitive skills. It's true for individuals and groups. You have 5 factors, either for individual or groups, like a country, like a society. And the brain development program is for development of the brain. It's not genes. And gene, it's much wider. I'll get to that. Then you have sensors, your eyes, ears, skins, effectors like your arm, legs, and mouth to speak. And you have computational resource like how many neurons you have in the brain. And 5 is how the learner is taught. Now you can see that gene maybe has a very, very important contribution to 1, 2, 3, 4, but also to 5. I get to that. Stephen Molyneux, as I quoted just from Wikipedia, far right, white nationalist, scientific racism, white supremacy, perverse fixation on race and IQ. I just quoted from Wikipedia. I think that he has the right for speech freedom. Over here he said that further the impression that white people are smart or something like that, and I will get to that, all right? Steve Xu, he mentioned that siblings grow up in the same family. He mentioned him and his brother. The both siblings grew up in the same house. They probably both had same access to the environment, but somewhat the gap between him and his brother in terms of cognitive abilities. But I will get to that point, and I do not agree that his brother and Steve Xu have the same environment. Now, one of the reasons, there are many. Suppose you have a twin brother and they are in the same house and they fight for toys, if one twin brother get upper hand, and the loser will gain a loser mentality. So in other words, even a twin brother in the same house, it's a highly unstable system. You always have a loser and a winner, and the winner and loser will immediately get different environment because the outcome of the fight. Now, there was an issue discussed in that program, raising issue of discrimination. Steve Pinker said that as long as you treat people as individuals, then the discussion does not subscribe to discrimination. Recently, just last week, June the 11th, Thursday, MSU Graduate Employees Union had a letter to MSU President call for MSU to oust Stephen Shu, citing his remarks on intelligence and genetic research on others as racist and sexist. Steve Shu posted his view. What is really at stake is academic freedom, open discussion of important ideas, and scientific inquiry. President Stanley said he intended to institute diversity, equality, and inclusion training for faculties, staff, and students starting from the fall semester. The Chinese Faculty Club wrote a letter to President Stanley. There was a discussion of different views in the WeChat. The club wrote a letter without a vote. I had a view that genes affect all 5 factors. And let's look at how. So the brain developmental program is like how brain learns and wires. And between a normal child and autistic child, gene probably will contribute the child developmental program to be normal or autistic. So gene will affect first. A gene will affect others like second, which is the senses. And suppose you have genes that have the normal vision, or another person probably had short-sightedness. The third one is effectors. Suppose you are tall. If gene contributed to your tall versus another person that's short, and then your effectors are different, whether you can be reaching high or you can run fast and you are strong. Computational resource, suppose the gene, a normal person, you have a normal size of the brain, and a normal monkey, you have a smaller brain. So that's a computational resource, give example in terms of brain size. Number 5, how the learner is taught. I'm talking about human here, white versus black. Suppose I'm black and another person is white. If the society is not fair, then the way that I was taught is different from another race. It's not just from others, and also self-inflicted. Give example, there are studies where a black person was mentioned that she is black, then the following performance is worse. So in other words, this is self-awareness. And the black persons or minority have self-consciousness related to discrimination or perceived inferior. Similarly, environment also affects all factors. Brain development program support the environment, don't have a good health care and nutrition, and school has a bullying, we have a mental tremors, then will affect the developmental program. For sensors, if you read a lot, not use properly your eyes, then you probably will develop myopia. If you do not have tools like telescope and internet, then your sensor get less information. And for effectors, If you do not have nutrients enough and you don't do enough exercise, that's from the environment. And if the tools, you don't have cars, you won't be able to move fast. Don't have internet, then you cannot transmit your information like the effect of your effectors very far to a wide scope. In terms of computational resources, tool availability in the environment, like papers for take notes, computers to do computation to assist the brain, and the books for knowledge, whether you have a secretary with you, so that your computational resource can be offloaded to your secretary or to your teammates. Number 5 is how the learner is taught. Suppose the environment was good, then you have an anti-discrimination law. But if a society environment does not have an anti-discrimination law or did not carry out as well as it should, then all the factors, how it's taught, is affected by availability of the schooling and the social level that you can reach, like glass ceiling. Now, I'd like to say that we said the genes and the environment, all right, they're called nature versus nurture. Past 2 slides basically said that nature-nurture is not a good dichotomy of intelligence, not at all, because they both affect 5 factors. Now let's look at the reciprocal relationship. So gene can affect environment. The next slide, I will say that environment will affect gene. So it's not really clear-cut. Factor A or factor B, concept A or concept B. All right. So suppose we have a brain developmental program, factor 1, and a racial discrimination, you can lead to depressive family. So that's effect of the environment. Suppose we have a race-based poverty, then you have limited access to internet, that affect your senses. And the same thing that if you have race-based poverty, then you have limited access to internet, then it's like your effectors. And for computational resource, if you have a race-based poverty, then you have limited access to computers. And in term number 5, how the learner is taught, and the race-based poverty will limit the availability of higher education. So you can see that gene will affect environment. So later I will talk about the correlation that Steve Pinker was talking about. So if you have reciprocal relationship, then it's not really clear-cut. The correlation makes sense, all right? Because they are really mutually have a reciprocal causality. So look at the reciprocal causality from environment to genes. Look at that, all right? So for developmental program, you have isolated society, then depressive gene will be selected. Like suppose you have a very depressive society, then you tend to pick up depressive behaviors, and those that are catered to the government will be more successful. Those have a free thought probably will not be able to get married, and their gene will not be passed down. So that's environment affect gene. Look at the census. Suppose an isolated society, then you don't have good vision, and the group internet is blocked. Like some country, like in China, they block the internet. If block internet, it's from the environment, but the gene may be affected because people do not really have the kind of drive to learn what's going on outside. In terms of effectors, if we have isolated society, then they have a shorter, smaller foot, like in China, right? So if your ladies are picked up for smaller foot, by the way, my grandma, they bound the foot, and they like to pick up ladies have a smaller foot. Then the ladies with smaller foot will be picked up in the genes, and the group becomes blinded, because if you do not have the effect that can do things that other society can do. and they tend to be shorter. For example, suppose that you don't have a lot of freedom and everybody is supposed to listen to the government, and the weaker, the more the government like you. So it becomes shorter. And the computational resources. An isolated society, for example, in China between 1949 and 1977, roughly that time, 30 years, and the computers are embargoed. And I was a student in China majoring in computer science. At that time, we have only one computer, one mainframe computer in the entire campus. We have 43 students. We have to really wait in line to get access to the computer, to the programming. How the learners start? The isolated society, you have limited access to modern sciences, then maybe your behaviors are not due to new ideas. Your novelty becomes weak. Novelty, curiosity is weak. That also affects genes. Now, I'd like to raise the issue many people probably already thought that Europe developed earlier, modern days, due to genes. Sriyansa Dash had several reasons. One is that Europe pulled ahead of the rest of the world only since the 16th to 17th century, and China was arguably the most technically advanced civilization before that time. I think the reason is that because economy has not developed a high level of navigation need, then the large land will help you to do farming. But I will talk about the navigation. As soon as the technology is ready for navigation, then the large land, like in China, becomes a bad factor. The lack of larger controlling state, because Europe did not have a larger controlling state. And there is a Black Death that has to do with Islamic states in the Middle East, Christianity, extraction of value from nature, but that I don't agree very much because other religions also have similar thoughts. Where the land is connected and the climate and geography, I will talk about Gillette Diamond's view next. Gillette Diamond had a book, well-known book, many people have read it, titled Guns, Germs, and Steels. And he had a lot of stories, and he is a biologist, and he had views that mainly it's the predominant west-east orientation of Eurasia that's the main reason that for the continent developed. If it's a south and north, then it would not really help the development. Maybe it has to do with the weather, temperature, farming. My view is that geographical differences play a major role in Europe develop faster than Asia. And look at the shape of the continent. China, it's an Asian continent. It's very much a single piece. And Europe is divided by waters. And I'll get to that. It's by waters, but the waters are not too wide to prevent navigation. And you know that you have neighbors and you need to go, and then you start to motivate by desire to navigate. And I'll get to that in the next slide. And same reason Japan. Why Japan developed earlier than China in the modern days? Because the smaller land next to a large continent, and there is a need to cross the water. In fact, Japan invaded China a few times. Put in a nutshell, geography forced competition. My point is that it's the competition pulled Europe ahead. So I'll look at a few examples. Water divided lands, but not too wide to cross. And the need for navigation. Once you see the water there, you need the navigation. So you need to go to other states. And not like China. China, as this place is small and so far away, China had a similar navigation. But after they did it, they just was not interested anymore. Over here, so important to navigate into other places. And hard to conquer the huge land by a single power. Why? Because lands are divided. We have seen a lot of stories that when you cross the water, it's difficult to move your armed force across the water and you fight over there. So it's much harder than like Genghis Khan and move across the land. They are all dry land. Over here you have water that divide you and your competitors. So you have competitions, division, you have invasions. And then in the 15th century, we have navigation, starting from Greece and Spain. And once you have navigation, you start to develop more techniques and you have colonies. So what I like to say is that human eugenics is unethical. Although on the surface, eugenics, maybe scientifically it's fine, like Steve Shu said, but we need to be really more careful, not simple-minded. So traits are unlikely attributed to few genes, like autism. Autism has a very wide spectrum, and it's not a single type. I think that autism is probably part of distribution, and we need diversity. Autism is the cost of intelligence, and you need to have diversity in order to do evolution. What about our height? Why our height, we do not have people that can really, really high? Maybe there is a reason. If tall people marry to another tall people, do you think that the kids get twice as tall? No. So there is a reason. It's a distribution. And we do not want to say that we only just want to pick the kids that are tall. There is a personality partially also attributed to the genes, but personality is even more complex, very, very sophisticated. And I don't think that should be attributed to a few genes. If that's the case, we probably will never be able to do eugenics in a reasonable fashion. Not at all, because just very, very complex, and it would not be able to identify certain genes at all. And you have a huge distribution of the genes, and genes, millions or billions of genes have to work together. And what about the government? They promote something like gene screening for autism. And if the government start to do that, you have tragedies. Because government do not have enough knowledge, but they have powers. They can do something really, really bad before they realize a big mistake has already made. And if the government start to regulate the height, that's really, really bad, because they did not know whether we can regulate the height through gene selections. What about for pedigrees? That has been done across royal families and the dogs. We humans have been breeding dogs so that their blood is pure for a particular variety, and the royal family want to do that too. They want to keep their blood pure. What about the government want to promote and reduce the size of population, like what happened in China? Government saw that, we want to get rid of the poor status of China, and we want to reduce the size of population in China. And they did something like single child per family policy that caused tremendous damage. There's nothing in the human history the government is so powerful that he can regulate the birth, and in such a large scale. And China realized that problem now, but it's already too late. The population is getting too old. What about sterilizing undesirables? And what do you mean by undesirables? Are they the minorities? How about the majorities? Consider minorities undesirable. So my position from my study and research, my lone voice is that evolution has no directions. It's natural and there's no directions. There's no set directions like government want to regulate those directions. That is wrong. Now discuss some open questions, and I'd like to raise to you so that we can continue our discussion. When we use correlates, do we treat persons as individuals? Like Steve Pinker used both terms. He used correlates and he talked about the relationship between genes and IQs. Then he said, as soon as you treat persons as individuals, then the discussion will not subscribe to discrimination. But if you relate yourself to the group you are with, and how you can be fairly treated as an individual. Is it correct to attribute normal human cognitive abilities to individuals' genes? And I said already with many examples, genes can hardly predict IQ at all. Are white genetically smart? And I already said that Europe pulled ahead because of the geography. Are Asians genetically mathematical? And we saw that maybe correlates, right? So we have more Asians that are good at math, then we want to treat the Asians supposed to be good at math. Correlates. Could the genes reasonably predict IQ scores at all? And my 5-factor model says no. Because the genes and environment is not good concept at all for intelligence, because each can affect 5 factors and they mutually have relationship. They have a reciprocal causalities. So why do we say one but not the others? Because they are mutually affected with one another. How should we avoid racist fraud in eugenics? We should not be very naive, simple-minded, especially those that with a higher position in universities, in government. They should state with a clear mind of social impact, because they have powers. They are not like individual researchers like me. Individual freedoms of speech should be balanced with person with power, like president or VP. Thank you very much. And if you like, you can add comments